A gloved fist ripped through the air toward a young man's head. He tilted back just enough. The punch missed by an inch and kept going. A second man lunged forward and shoved him hard in the chest. He stumbled into the ropes, caught himself, and stood back up. The crowd around the ring started shouting. Money changed hands fast in the front row. Someone spat on the canvas near his feet. He said nothing. He just tied the laces on his gloves and waited. He didn't look afraid at all. Across from him stood the champion of the whole stadium, a man who had never lost, twice his size, and grinning like this was already over. The young man in the ropes was Muay Lee, 21 years old, thousands of miles from home. What his opponent's own trainer whispered next stopped the champion cold. "Stay with me on this one. Now let me take you back a few hours because none of this was supposed to happen." It was a hot afternoon in Bangkok in the spring of 1962. Bruce Lee was not famous yet. He wasn't a movie star. He wasn't the man the whole world would come to know. He was just a lean kid from Hong Kong who happened to be passing through Thailand, and who could never, ever walk past a martial arts gym without stopping to look. That was his whole problem, if you want to call it a problem. He couldn't leave it alone. He'd found this place by accident. It was a roadside training camp, open on one side to the street, with a worn ring in the middle and heavy bags hanging from the rafters on thick ropes. The fighters there trained Muay Thai. Now, if you don't know Muay Thai, here's the thing you need to understand. They call it the art of 8 limbs. 2 fists, 2 elbows, 2 knees, 2 shins. These men turned their shins into iron by kicking banana trees and hardwood posts, day after day, year after year, until the bone itself grew dense as a club. A Muay Thai kick doesn't push you, it breaks you. And the men in this camp were the best in the country. Bruce stood at the edge of the street watching them, and he did what he always did. He started moving his own hands quietly off to the side, testing the ideas he saw. His Wing Chun. Fast, close range, straight down the center. His fingers snapped out in little chains, one strike flowing into the next, so quick you could barely count them. He wasn't showing off. He genuinely couldn't help it. His body just did that when he watched fighting, but somebody was watching him. Over by the ring stood a big man. And when I say big, I mean big for a Thai fighter, which is rare, because most of them are small and wiry. This one had shoulders like a doorway and a chest carved out of stone. His name was Chaeya Wunks, and in that city at that moment, Chaeya was a king. He was the reigning champion of Lumpini Stadium, the most famous fighting ground in all of Thailand. He had something like 40 fights and not a single loss. Not one. Men would empty their pockets betting on him. Women threw flowers. Children followed him down the street. He had never in his life been beaten, and he had started to believe he never could be. Chaeya watched this skinny foreigner flicking his hands around, and he started to laugh. He nudged the fighter next to him and pointed. He said something in Thai loud, and the men around him burst out laughing too. Bruce didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Anybody would. It was the sound of a strong man mocking a stranger to make his friends laugh. Chaeya walked over. He was a full head taller than Bruce and probably 50 pounds heavier. He looked Bruce up and down like he was inspecting a chicken at the market. Then he raised his own hands and did a little dance, wiggling his fingers, mimicking Wing Chun, making it look soft and silly. A dancer's trick. That's what he called it, and one of the fighters who spoke a little English translated it for Bruce with a grin. A dancer's trick. Now here's what you have to know about Bruce Lee. He was not a man who needed to prove anything to anyone. He'd spend his whole life saying that a real fighter doesn't seek fights, he avoids them. He believed that, he lived it. So Bruce just smiled, gave a small nod, and turned to leave. He didn't want trouble in a foreign country. He was smarter than that. But Chaeya didn't want him to leave. The champion stepped in front of him, blocking the way. He put one huge hand flat on Bruce's chest and pushed. Not hard enough to hurt. just hard enough to say, "You don't go anywhere until I say so." The crowd on the street was growing now. Word travels fast when the champion is putting on a show. Men drifted in from the market, from the noodle stalls, from the doorways across the road. 30 people, then 50. All of them watching this foreigner get pushed around by their hero. Bruce set his feet. He looked up at Cheya, and for the first time something in his face changed, just slightly. A quiet steadiness came into his eyes, the kind of calm that isn't fear and isn't anger either. It's something colder than both. Off to the side, an older man had gone very still. This was Crew Somsak. Crew means teacher, and Somsak had been training fighters in that camp for over 30 years. He was the one who had made Cheya into a champion, back when Cheya was just an angry farm boy with fast hands. Somsak had seen more fights than anyone alive in that city. Thousands of them. He knew the look of a beaten man before the first punch. He knew the look of a scared man, a proud man, a foolish man. He had a sense for these things that no young fighter could ever have. And when Somsak looked at this skinny Chinese kid standing quiet in the middle of a jeering crowd, refusing to flinch, he felt the hair stand up on his arms. He grabbed Cheya's elbow. He said in Thai, low and fast so only the champion could hear it, "Leave this one. Let him walk." Cheya turned and stared at his old teacher like he'd lost his mind. Because everything about the moment told Cheya he was right and Somsak was wrong. Look at the kid, half his size, a foreigner, doing party tricks with his hands. There wasn't a soul in that crowd who would have bet a single coin on Bruce Lee, and Cheya had never lost. Why in the world would he walk away from the easiest win of his career in front of his own people on his own ground? He shook off Somsak's hand, he pointed at the ring, and he said the words that started the whole thing. "Get in, full contact, gloves on, let's see the dance." The crowd roared, and that's how a quiet afternoon turned into the fight nobody there would ever forget. Now Bruce could have said no. Let's be honest about that. He could have laughed it off and walked into the street and been on a bus by nightfall. Nobody would have blamed him. A man doesn't have to fight the champion of a foreign country just because he got mocked. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. But Cheya made a mistake. When Bruce turned to go the second time, Cheya grabbed the back of his shirt and yanked hard and shoved him toward the ring so that Bruce nearly went down in the dirt. And he said one more thing, and the man who spoke English translated it, and this time he didn't grin when he did. Cheya had said, "Your kind always run. Your kind." Bruce Lee stood up. He brushed the dust off his shirt slowly. And then, without a word, he walked to the ropes and climbed into the ring. The whole street went up like a stadium. Men were shouting, pushing to get closer, waving money over their heads. Somebody found a pair of worn leather gloves and tossed them up to Bruce. He caught them out of the air. He sat down on the edge of the ring and started lacing them onto his hands, calm as a man tying his shoes. And this is the moment from the very beginning. The fist that ripped past his head. The shove into the ropes. Because Cheya, impatient, had thrown a punch before Bruce was even ready, just to show the crowd who was boss, and Bruce had leaned back and let it sail past and gone right on tying his gloves like nothing happened. Crew Somsak climbed halfway up the ring steps. He grabbed his fighter's arm one more time. I want you to picture this old man, 30 years of fighting behind him. His whole life spent reading the truth in men's bodies, and he is begging, not warning, begging. He is telling the greatest champion he ever produced to get out of the ring, and he can't even explain why, because it doesn't make sense, because the kid is small and foreign and alone. Somsak said, "I've watched 10,000 fights. I'm telling you, this is not a boy. Look at his eyes. There is nothing in there for you to beat." Cheya laughed in his teacher's face. He pulled his arm free, banged his gloves together, and turned to the crowd with both fists raised. They screamed his name. Cheya, Cheya, Cheya. He drank it in. He was the king, and this was his court, and the little foreigner in the corner was about to become the best story he'd ever tell. Somsek stepped back down. He didn't watch the crowd. He watched Bruce. And what he saw made him fold his hands together and go quiet, like a man watching weather roll in. There was no referee, not really. Just one of the older fighters standing between them, ready to wave them together. He looked at Chaya. He looked at Bruce. Bruce gave a single small nod. The fighter dropped his hand and jumped back, and Chaya came forward like a landslide. He led with that famous roundhouse kick, the one that had ended most of his fights. His shin swung around at the level of Bruce's ribs, fast enough to crack bone, thrown by a man who had broken plenty. The crowd sucked in one breath. Bruce slipped it like water. He didn't block it. He didn't back up straight. He just wasn't there anymore. He rolled his whole body a few inches inside the arc of the kick, and the shin whipped past his back, and suddenly Bruce was close, right up against Chaya's chest, inside the range where all those long, powerful weapons couldn't reach. And two knuckles tapped Chaya twice on the jaw. Tap, tap, light, almost gentle, a warning. Chaya froze for half a second. He hadn't even seen the hands move. One moment he was throwing the kick of his life, and the next this foreigner was pressed against him, touching his chin like he was reminding him of something. The crowd went quiet, not silent, but that first roar had died in their throats because their eyes had told them something their brains didn't want to accept. Chaya's face turned hard. The playing was over now. He shoved Bruce off with both hands and came in again, and this time it wasn't a show. This time he meant to hurt him. He threw a knee, driving up from the hip, aiming to split Bruce open. Bruce turned his body and let it graze past. He fired an elbow, that terrible short elbow that opens faces like fruit. Bruce ducked under it so smoothly it looked planned. And every time Chaya missed, Bruce touched him, on the shoulder, on the cheek, on the ribs, never hard, never trying to finish it. Just touching again and again, saying without words, "I could have hit you there, and there, and there." Do you understand what that does to a fighter, to a champion? It's worse than being knocked down. Being knocked down is honest. This was something else. This was being made a fool of by a man who was choosing not to hurt you. And this is a good place for me to stop and say something to you directly. If you've made it this far into the story, if your heart is beating a little faster right now, wondering how this ends, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button. That's all. It's free. And it tells me you want more stories like this one, the real ones about real men and the moments that tested them. All right, back to the ring. Because here's where it stopped being a fight over pride and started being something a lot more dangerous. In the front row, the men who had bet on Chaya were not laughing anymore. And these were not ordinary men. Some of them ran the gambling in that district. Serious people. People who had put down real money on the champion, easy money, sure money, and were now watching that money slip away in front of a crowd. One of them, a heavy man in a pale shirt, leaned over the ropes and said something to Chaya between exchanges. Low, fast, ugly. And the man who spoke English, standing next to Bruce's corner, went pale, and he leaned in toward Bruce during the pause and said quietly, "Be careful now. They just told him, finish the foreigner." And it was clear from his face that finish did not mean win the match. You see what changed? A minute ago, this was a proud man who wanted to look good in front of a crowd. Now it was a cornered champion, being ordered by dangerous men to make sure this stranger did not walk out of that ring on his own 2 feet. It wasn't about the dance anymore. It wasn't even about pride. It was about the fact that Bruce Lee had made powerful people lose money and lose face at the same time, and men like that do not forgive it. Cruz Somsak heard it too, and the old teacher's face changed from worry to something closer to dread, because now he wasn't afraid for his student. He was afraid of what his student was about to do and what would happen to that foreign boy afterward, win or lose. Chaya came out different this time, slower, meaner. He'd stopped trying to look good. He was hunting now. He cut off the ring, using his long reach to trap Bruce against the ropes, closing the space where Bruce liked to escape. He'd figured out one thing, the only thing he could figure. The kid was untouchable in open space. So don't give him open space. Pin him, crowd him, turn all that room into a cage, and for a moment it worked. Chaya got Bruce backed into the corner. He unloaded. A knee, an elbow, a short hook, all of it thrown in tight quarters where Bruce couldn't slip away. One of the elbows clipped Bruce above the eye. Not clean, but enough. A thin line of red opened over his brow, and the crowd found its voice again, roaring, because now their champion was drawing blood and everything felt right in the world again. Bruce blinked the red out of his eye. He covered up, took 2 more shots on his forearms that would have dropped a smaller man, and let Chaya believe he had him. That was the trap, because Chaya, smelling the finish, wound up for the big one. The right elbow, the fight tender. He threw everything he had into it, his whole 200 pounds, aiming to take Bruce's head off against the corner post. And Bruce was gone. He'd read the wind-up the instant it started. He dropped his level, spun off the ropes to the outside, and Chaya's elbow smashed into the wooden corner post with a crack that everyone in the street heard. The champion howled. His arm dropped. And now, for the first time all fight, Bruce Lee stood in open space with a wounded man in front of him and no reason left to be gentle. The crowd felt it turn. You could hear it. 50 people all going quiet at the same instant. Now let me tell you exactly what happened next, because this is the part people got wrong for years, the part that became a legend, and the truth of it is better than the legend. Bruce did not go wild. He did not swing for the fences. That was never his way. What he did was worse if you were Chaya. He simply began to work. He stepped in on the straight line, the Wing Chun line, right down the center where Chaya's long weapons couldn't curl around him. His hands came up in that chain again, the one Chaya had mocked as a dancer's trick. Except now the crowd saw what the trick actually was. It wasn't dancing. Each strike landed and the next was already coming, and the one after that, faster than the eye could follow, a machine gun of straight punches straight up the middle into the champion's face and chest and throat. Chaya tried to cover. Bruce hit the gaps. Chaya tried to clinch, to grab, to smother, to use his size the way he always had. Bruce hit him and slid off to the angle and hit him again from the side where he wasn't looking. Every time Chaya reached for him, Bruce was already somewhere else, and the punches never stopped coming. And then Bruce showed him the kick. Everybody in that ring, that whole camp, they were Muay Thai men. They thought they owned the kick. They thought no foreigner had anything to teach them about kicking. And Bruce Lee threw a side kick into Chaya's lead thigh that folded the champion's leg like it was made of paper. The crowd made a sound I can't even describe, a groan and a gasp together, because they knew kicks and they had never seen one thrown like that straight through with the whole body behind it from a man who was supposed to only know his hands. Chaya's leg buckled. He caught himself. He was still up. And I'll give the man this, he had a champion's heart, because most fighters would have already gone down and stayed down. He gathered himself and threw one last desperate roundhouse, the same kick he'd started the fight with, 40 fights of undefeated instinct pouring into one final swing. Bruce caught it. He caught the champion's kicking leg against his side with one arm, the way you'd catch a thrown log, and for one frozen moment the two of them stood there locked together, the giant balanced on one leg and the smaller man holding the other. And Bruce looked him dead in the eyes. There was no hate in it, no triumph, just that same cold steadiness Somsak had seen from the street an hour before. And then Bruce swept the leg he was still standing on. Chaya went down. The undefeated champion of Lumpini Stadium hit the canvas flat on his back with the whole world watching, and the crash of it silenced the entire street. Bruce did not jump on him. He did not raise his arms. He stepped back and let the man fall, and he stood there breathing, blood on his eyebrow, and he waited to see if Chaya would get up. Chaya tried. He rolled to his side. He got one glove under himself and pushed, and his arm shook and gave out, and he went back down, and this time he didn't try again. Nobody in that crowd moved. Nobody cheered. Nobody knew what to do, because the thing they had all come to watch was the exact opposite of the thing they had gotten. They had come to see a foreigner humiliated. Instead, they had seen their king laid out on his own canvas by a skinny kid doing a dance nobody understood until it was too late. And into that silence walked Crew Somsak. The old teacher climbed slowly into the ring, but he did not go to Chaya first. That surprised everyone. He walked past his fallen champion straight up to Bruce Lee, and he stopped in front of him. And this man who had trained fighters for 30 years, who had produced the greatest champion the stadium had ever seen, put his hands together in front of his chest and bowed, deep, all the way, to a foreigner half his fighter's size. Then he straightened up, and in the little English he had, he said one word. He said, "Teacher." That was the moment Bruce Lee's face finally changed. All the coldness went out of it. He looked almost embarrassed. He put his own hands together and bowed back, lower than the old man had, the way you bow to someone with far more years and wisdom than yourself. And whatever the crowd had been feeling, that broke it. Because if the champion's own master was bowing to the stranger, then maybe what they'd seen wasn't a shame at all. Maybe it was a gift. Maybe they'd been standing on a roadside in Bangkok and watched something none of them would ever see again. Bruce knelt down next to Chaya. He didn't gloat. He put a hand on the big man's shoulder and helped him sit up. And Chaya, dazed, blood in his mouth, looked at this man he had shoved and mocked and tried to hurt, and he did not see an enemy. He saw the first person in 40 fights who had shown him the ceiling above his own head, and something in the champion's face came apart, not from the beating, from understanding. But remember the men in the front row. They had not bowed. They were not moved. They had lost their money, and their champion was flat on the canvas, and standing over him was the reason for all of it. As Bruce helped Chaya up, the heavy man in the pale shirt was already pushing through the ropes with 2 others behind him, and their faces had nothing sporting in them at all. And here is where the whole night turned one last time, and where Chaya Wunks became the man his teacher had always hoped he could be, because Chaya saw them coming for Bruce. And the champion, still on his knees, still bleeding, reached out and grabbed the pale-shirted man by the wrist and stopped him cold. And Chaya said, loud enough for the whole street to hear, in his own language so there could be no mistake. He said, "This man is my guest. If you touch him, you answer to me." The pale-shirted man looked down at his champion, this beaten, kneeling giant, and he understood that the fight might be over, but Chaya's fists were not. And a knee-high district boss does not want the strongest man in the city as an enemy over a bet already lost. He pulled his wrist free. He looked at Bruce for a long, cold second, and then he spat on the canvas, turned, and left with his men, and the danger walked out of that ring on its own 2 legs. Somsak let out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like an hour. Chaya got to his feet with Bruce's help. He stood there swaying, and then he did the last thing anyone expected. He raised Bruce Lee's arm into the air himself. The champion lifting the hand of the man who had beaten him, showing the whole crowd who the better fighter was. And the street, which had gone so silent, finally roared again. But it was a different roar. It wasn't for blood. It was for something they'd witnessed that was bigger than blood. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the sun was going down, the 3 of them sat on the edge of the ring. Chaya, Somsak, and Bruce. Somebody had brought water and cloth for the cut over Bruce's eye. And through the man who spoke a little English, they talked. Bruce told them he was sorry it had gone the way it had. He said he hadn't come there to shame anyone. He never fought to shame a man. He fought, he said, only to find out the truth, and he'd have preferred to find it in friendly sparring, not in front of a mob. Chaya waved that off. Cheya said the shame had been his own, for judging a man by his size and his country, and for 2 eyes that could see 40 easy wins but couldn't see the one man in the world who was better. And then Cheya asked the question that had been sitting in his chest since he hit the canvas. He asked how. How does a smaller man beat a bigger one every time without even seeming to try? How is that possible? Bruce thought about it. And then he said something that Somsak, the old teacher, would repeat for the rest of his life to every young fighter who came through that camp. Bruce said, you fought your 40 fights the same way 40 times. And you won, so you thought that meant you'd found the answer. But a style is just a cage you build for yourself. I don't have a style. I take what works and I throw away what doesn't. When you kicked, I wasn't fighting Muay Thai. I was just fighting you. The particular man in front of me in that particular second. That's the whole secret. There is no secret. Somsak closed his eyes and nodded slowly, like a man who had waited 30 years to hear something out loud that he'd always half known. Now, I want to be honest with you here, because that matters to me. Stories like this one grow in the telling. Over the years, the tale of a young Bruce Lee facing a Thai champion has been told 100 ways, and some of them got taller than the truth. But strip away the exaggerations and what's underneath is real, and it's this. A proud, undefeated fighter at the top of his world was handed a moment that could have destroyed him. Public defeat, lost money, a crowd that had worshipped him watching him fall. Most men, that moment turns them bitter for the rest of their days. They spend their lives explaining it away, blaming the ring, the gloves, the luck, anything but the truth. Cheya didn't do that. Cheya took the hardest night of his life and let it make him bigger instead of smaller. He raised his conqueror's hand. He stood between that man and the people who wanted to hurt him. He asked how, and he actually listened to the answer. And that, more than the 40 wins, is why the old men in Bangkok still tell the story. Not the loss, the way he lost. As for Bruce, he left Thailand a few days later and went on with his life. He was still years away from everything the world would come to know him for. The films, the fame, the whole legend. But the thing he said on the edge of that ring, about having no style, about taking what works and throwing away the rest, he would spend the next decade turning into a philosophy that changed martial arts forever. People would give it a name. They'd write books about it. And it started, or at least it was tested, on a hot afternoon on a Bangkok roadside, against a man who called it a dancer's trick. And Kru Somsak, the old teacher, had a sense that afternoon standing in the street that the hair on his arms and the cold in his gut were trying to tell him something. He grabbed his champion's arm and begged him to walk away, and he couldn't even say why. He just knew. 30 years of watching men fight had put something in him that was faster than words, and it looked at a skinny foreigner doing quiet drills on the roadside and said, "Not this one. Leave this one alone." He was right. He was always going to be right. And the thing he saw in that young man's eyes, that stillness that wasn't fear and wasn't anger, was the same thing that would one day look out of movie screens all over the world and make an entire generation want to learn what he knew. They say Somsak kept a photograph after that, not of Cheya's 40 victories, of the day his champion lost. He'd point at it and tell the young fighters, "You want to know what a great man looks like? It's not the one whose arm gets raised. Sometimes it's the one doing the raising. So the next time somebody bigger than you, louder than you, more certain than you, tells you that what you do is nothing, a trick, a joke, beneath them, you don't have to argue, you don't have to shout. You just tie your gloves and you keep your eyes still and you let the truth do its own talking. Because the loudest man in the room is almost never the most dangerous one. The most dangerous one is usually standing quiet in the corner, nodding, waiting, watching you throw the first punch." And that quiet man on that day in Bangkok was Bruce Lee.